Anyway, so what we're going to do this Sunday and next Sunday is we're going to answer the question, what is the church? And some of this may be, I actually preached a message on this at the beginning of our Ecclesia series that we did 2 years ago. And so I've kind of taken that initial introductory message and I've added a few things to it. So this could be a little bit of a repeat if you can remember a sermon from 2 years ago. I find that highly unlikely, but it's possible. But this is a really important question to answer. What is the church? And it's even more important as it leads us to important actions based on the foundational identity of who we are to be. What is the church? And as a result of what the church is, it leads us to certain actions and certain things that are important for us. So understanding who we are as a church will inform us for how we're to operate and what we're supposed to do. It helps us know where as a church we're supposed to put our priorities. It helps us focus our energy in the right places. And so namely, it helps us know and live out what we're to be about as Christians, as followers of Jesus. And so our hope and our goal is that we would not only see what Jesus intended for the church when he started her, but that Jesus would work in us and use us as a church for the mission that he has for us moving forward. And so this week we're going to begin by attempting to define, and if you came in late, I guess I did mention this, so you don't see PowerPoint on this because of our technical problems, so sorry about that. But this week we're going to begin by attempting to define what the church is and what she's supposed to be about. And next week we're going to look at some specific examples from the Bible of churches that operated out of this identity. And our hope is going to be that as we look at these different churches next week, that their way of operation might inform our way of operation today and moving forward. Again, we're not going to be looking at how other churches right now are operating, although that could be a valuable thing as well. We want to go back as close as we can to the inception of the early church and look at some biblical examples of how she operated as it was closely tied to the identity of what the church is. As with most things, the further you get from the starting point of something, the more likely or the easier it is for you to lose focus on what that thing is supposed to be about. So that's why business and companies, right, sometimes they find themselves in a very tough spot. As times change, they sometimes have to adjust their mission, right? Or sometimes businesses that fail to succeed are businesses that maybe have started because this is really what they're to be about, and as time has evolved, they've maybe completely changed who they are. They're no longer true to who they were. Now, for some companies that works, and for others, that actually kills them, right? And so in some senses, that's true for the church as well. When we have a distance between our starting point and where we are today, sometimes we can change and morph to such a way that we miss the true heartbeat of what the church is supposed to be about. We've got too much time in between when it started and where we are today, and a lot of tradition, a lot of things to develop that can take our focus off of what our identity is supposed to be. I hope that makes sense. So to start this morning, I want to take a little bit of time and just do a definition, or I'm going to kind of define a couple different things for us this morning. So to start, when we talk about the word church, the word church has a lot of different meanings, and as a result, when we try to define the word, it can be confusing, and it can be loaded with a lot of baggage. Now, some of that baggage is good, and some of it's bad. Baggage isn't always good or bad, right? Or it isn't always bad. It sometimes can be good baggage. When we use the word church, a lot of times we use the word church to refer to an institution. So we might, either a large or a small institution. So we may talk about, quote unquote, the church. And you may think about that in terms of the universal church. If you're a part of the Catholic faith, which is really the origination of the Christian church, was actually the Catholic Church. That's how it started. Catholic meaning universal, right? And now it's got its own niche in terms of what we understand churches to be. But you may think about, when we talk about the church, you may think about the Catholic Church, or you may think about the evangelical church in America. You may think of, when we talk about the church, you may think of Mission Springs Community Church. And when you think about it or talk about it, it's something that you think about in terms of an institution or an organization. It's got a constitution. It's got bylaws. We talk about Mission Springs Community Church maybe like a business in some ways. And a lot of that's because of our country's financial laws depend on it. We have to have a certain tax-exempt status, right? We have to have a constitution and bylaws to back up the organization. Like there's these certain institutional parameters that our culture and our government places on how we are identified as. And so as a result, we can think about church in terms of an institutional understanding. We can also use the word church to not only refer to this organization known as the church, Mission Springs Community Church, but we can also use the word church to refer to actual buildings or property. So we may say, I'm going to come down and meet you at the church, or I'll see you at church next Sunday. And so for some using that word, they're talking about the church property, the location. The church, Mission Springs Community Church, is located at 48989 Millmont Drive in Fremont. After all, that's where we get mail, right? So it's a location. There's a property associated with it. We also use the word church to refer to the worship service. So what we're doing right now in here, some of us will refer to and talk about church as this. I'm going to go to church this Sunday morning. You're not necessarily thinking about I'm going to go to the physical address, but I'm going to go to a worship service, right? If we're lucky, we might actually believe that the word church is to mean people. Like you and me, that we are the church. After all, what we're going to see this morning is that this is the very root meaning of what the church is. It is a collection of people. It is not an institution. It is not an organization. It is not a tax-exempt free way that the government sees us. It is not a property associated with an address. It's not a building. It is a people. That is her foundation. That is her identity, her true identity. So when we use the word church, you can see that we use it for a lot of different meanings, right? And that's where the word can be confusing. You can say that word and mean a lot of different things by it. And so it might be safe to say that if we really want to understand what the church is, we should probably go back and look at the true origins of the word for church and what meaning the word church had when the church was actually started. And so that's kind of to help paint a little bit of a picture of this understanding of church. And I want to get into some of the origins of this. So the word church in the New Testament is a Greek word, and it's the word ekklesia. That's the word that's used. That's where it comes from. That's our English rendering of church, where it came from. The word is comprised of two Greek words, the word ek and kaleo. And the word ek means out, and kaleo means called. Okay? And so basically, the word literally means a called out assembly of people for a specific purpose. Okay? A called out assembly of people for a specific purpose. A congregation of people associated around something. Now, this definition is a good definition as it relates to the actual meaning of the Greek word, but it misses an important nuance because there's other Greek words that can be used to refer to an assembly of people. But what's interesting about ekklesia is that these are called out people in sort of a legal or political capacity. That's the nuance of the word here. So in Acts chapter 19, verse 39, this is one of the ways in which ekklesia shows up. It doesn't get translated in the NIV this way because it would be confusing the way that we hear it or read it. But it says here, if there's anything further you want to bring it up, it must be settled in a legal assembly. The word used there is ekklesia. It must be settled in a church. You see, ekklesia was a political term. It wasn't just a religious term. It had political connotations. And so in classical Greek, the word ekklesia or church carried this meaning of an assembly of citizens that are summoned by the crier, the legislative assembly. Black's Law Dictionary defines church this way. This might be helpful as well. In its most general sense, the church is the religious society founded and established by Jesus Christ to receive, preserve, and propagate his doctrines and ordinances. That's the way Black's Law Dictionary defines it. Or another definition for church is a body or community of Christians united under one form of government. Like, this is ancient definitions here. One form of government by the profession of one faith and the observance of the same rituals and ceremonies. So Black's Law's Dictionary captures the political nature of the term ecclesia. Society, it's established, propagates certain things. It's a form of government. Now, why is this important? Why is it important to understand the called out political nature of the origins of the word church? So, if ecclesia carries with it a meaning of these called out people under the umbrella of a political assembly, then our understanding of the church today needs to be informed by this reality. It has to be. It has to be informed by this. This is a part of the origins of the word and where the understanding of church came from. So we are called out people organized and assembled in order to operate actually politically in some capacity. But what does this really mean? Does it mean that the church is supposed to be politically active through our political system today? Now some, no doubt there are churches and Christians that really believe that their religious beliefs are tied very directly to a certain party, whether it be the Republican Party or the Democrat Party, or the Independent Party, or the Green Party, or any other party we want to name. Now, and certainly Christians have the ability to be politically active in certain parties, right? But I don't think that the meaning of the word ecclesia carries with it an identification where we are called to then align ourselves with political establishments of the day. I think what's being communicated here at the origins of the word church is that the church is to be a group of people that are called out and set apart and chosen by Jesus to be politically active in his things, in his kingdom, in his ways. So we pledge allegiance to Jesus and his kingdom, right? We are citizens of his kingdom. We are active in our participation and advancement of his kingdom, right? So it's not that I, Darren, go and I align myself with the Republicans or the Democrats and I try to enact what I believe to be Christian moral principles or whatever in those contexts, although I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. There's a lot of different, we could go into a whole other sermon on that, but that's not really the point here. The point is to say that the word has its origins in terms of this ulterior establishment, this ulterior society that's governed and ruled by somebody different than the existing political framework of the world. After all, this is what it means to be politically active in our context today and back in Jesus' day as well. So if you're a politician today, you're active in attempting to pass laws, right? And to enact change in the society that you live in based on your political principles and your beliefs. That's what politicians do. If you're an active political citizen in this country, you not only align yourselves with the policies, beliefs, and the practices of that party, but you actively desire to engage in the process in implementing those policies at a local level. That's what an active political citizen looks like a lot of times. Very much a part of the implementation of legislation, trying to get these things a part of and adopted by the culture we live in. You see, to be politically active in something is not just to believe in certain beliefs associated with that party, but it's to talk about them. It's to advocate for them, right? It's to protest about them. And to attempt to make the world better because of that. Now, this understanding of political activism should inform our understanding about what it means to be a called out political assembly of people active in the kingdom of Jesus. To be the church doesn't mean that we sit on the sidelines and that we let life happen to us. It means that we're to be about something bigger than ourselves. That we're to be active in both experiencing and expressing Jesus' kingdom to the world around us. But it also should be noted that being involved politically in Jesus' kingdom doesn't lead to the same sorts of divisiveness that it does in politics today. We kind of see this in our existing political systems. We're not about forcing the political agenda of Jesus onto others. Actually, we'll talk more about this later, but we have an agenda of love, right? So it's very different. But it still carries with it, right? You see this society that's gathered around certain principles and laws or rules or ways of operation that are intended to be carried out in the society that we live in. And so, it's a lot, right? It's kind of like a class this morning, I guess you could say. So we've talked about kind of what the church, our understanding of church, the multifaceted meanings of the word church, and now we've kind of navigated into trying to define the church to be this called out group of people that are set aside according to this having this kind of this political purpose to be a part of this new kingdom, this new way of life that Jesus is the author of, right? And so we want to take just a moment as well to define or to talk about what is this kingdom, right? And we've talked about this a few times over the last several years. What is this kingdom that we're to be politically active in, right? I know you're getting a little thrown off here a little bit as I keep using the terms politically active, right? Because you immediately go to maybe a protester or a demonstration or waving a blue flag if you're a Democrat or waving a red flag if you're a Republican or wearing a neutral color flag if you're independent. I don't even know what independent color is, but we know Green Party, I guess, would be a green flag. I don't know. But you're thinking in terms, I know it's a little bit, maybe a little bit of a stumbling block, because you're thinking in terms of like this political language, and it's a little hard to understand the church in that context because you see all these maybe negative images of divisiveness, okay? I get that. But just kind of stay with me a little bit here, okay? So now we want to talk about what is this kingdom that we are called to be politically active in. Again, kingdom is a term that is hard for us because we don't use it today, unless we're watching like a movie or a Netflix movie on something about a kingdom, which existed, thousands of years ago, right? It's based in Europe, And so we have a hard time understanding this language. But kingdom is really a term that relates to kind of this idea of a monarchy or a king that is ruling an area, a dominion, an area of land or property, et cetera, territory. And it's a realm. It's not even necessarily kingdom can refer to an actual property and land that's being run and controlled by a king or a queen. But it can also refer to a realm that's associated with or being under the control of a personal thing or an ideology or a way of life. So an example could be to say that although we as the United States people, we don't live within the kingdom, we don't use that language of the United States, but we still function essentially as a part of a kingdom known as the United States of America. We have constitution and bylaws, we have rules, we have laws, we have a political process, we have all these things, right? There's borders to our nation, right? There's an economic foundation and structure, like there's all these qualities of what a kingdom is. It's this entity that is being ruled by our legislative branch and our Congress and our presidents involved and all these things, right? We have these leaders that are implementing policies and plans and stuff for us. And that we, as a democracy, get to have a say in, right? And that we're a part of implementing as well. So, or we can also say, so we not only look at it in terms of the kingdom of the United States being this, but we also live within a financial kingdom, right? That's kind of unseen, but it leads to certain behaviors in our lives. So we could say that the way of money and the way wealth is operating in our country operates as its own kingdom, because it leads us to advocate for it in certain ways. Or we do certain things in our lives to say that we kind of pledge allegiance to the way that finances are done in the United States of America. So we kind of live and find ourselves a part of kind of this unphysical realm of kingdom, but we could also say as a kind of a financial wealth kingdom that's a part of our country. It leads us to do certain things, right? And so in Jesus' day, there were kingdoms that were a part of the language for Jesus' day. And I just kind of summed up three of them here. Not two, three. So the first kingdom of Jesus' day would have been the political kingdom, the ruling kingdom of the day, which was the Roman Empire. So Rome Rome was in charge, and the Jews didn't retain the same rights of ruling themselves as they had in the past. So they were definitely under the dominion of Caesar and Rome, okay? But they also carried with themselves a certain aspect of their own ruling in terms of the religious sector. So you had the Pharisees and the Sadducees that were the religious rulers and leaders of the day who carried out and enacted change among the people from a religious standpoint, right? And that's, you watch interesting dialogues or things that happen even when Jesus is crucified, and the Roman establishment and the Jewish religious establishment, and where they came into conflict, right? And how it could lead to rioting and problems. Like there's this convergence of two kingdoms that could be problematic. There's also this kingdom that existed in Jesus' day, which is a very powerful kingdom, and that is the kingdom of darkness. It's an unseen kingdom, but it dominates all the cultures of the world today. It is the power and the dominion that's established by the enemy. It is the control of and operation of sin in this world. It is the destructive force of our movement away from God. And so there's this kingdom of darkness that exists. It's a very real reality, and it's not maintained by borders or people or systems. It's actually a pervasive reality that we live within. So there's that kingdom as well. You see, you get the idea. There's all these different kingdoms. They were present in Jesus' day. They're present in our day. But Jesus comes on the scene, right? And he says, hey, I got good news. I got a different kingdom, right? I got something different for you than what you're experiencing right now. It's not the hypocrisy of the religious leaders. It's not the forceful Roman rule. It actually will destroy the kingdom of darkness. I have a good news kingdom. I have a gospel kingdom that I've come to share and to preach and to advocate, right? To enact, say, legislation for, right? The legislation can be found in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount, right? We'll get into that, right? So Jesus says we're called out as a church to be a part of that kingdom, that political assembly, the new kingdom of Jesus. And so this isn't an argument for the church to become more politically active within the political system of the United States of America. Although any Christian has the free will ability to do what they think in good conscience they need to do in terms of the political boundaries of our country. But that's not how we associate and understand the purpose of the church. What is meant here is that we are called out people by Jesus to be about his politics. Essentially, Jesus is king, Jesus is president of this kingdom, this system of government, of which we, as his followers, are its citizens. We are his citizens. And so as citizens of his kingdom, we swear allegiance to him first, over the kingdoms of this world. And where the kingdoms of this world are in conflict with the kingdoms of Jesus, we choose Jesus. Right? This is maybe a little hard for us to kind of differentiate between our political associations today and what it means to be a follower of Jesus. I would advocate that if you're a Christian and a follower of Jesus, your allegiance is first and foremost and primary to the teaching of love and the teaching of kingdom that Jesus advocates, regardless of where you draw your citizenship, regardless of whether you're American, whether you're European, whatever, right? So the church is to be the called out people of Jesus, to be a part of his governing, life-giving kingdom, and to make that life-giving kingdom known and visible to other people on this earth, right? So another way of saying this could be this, and I hope this isn't too confusing. I really apologize if it is. I'm trying to be as simplistic about it as possible. But church isn't necessarily a simple thing either. But the church is a called out group of people to be about the politics of Jesus, okay? And this leads these called out political people to put into practice certain actions, behaviors, and ways of life. And these actions, behaviors, and ways of life can be most notably summed up, I think, in three ways. A belief and an advocacy for the Great Commandment, a belief and an advocacy for Jesus' teachings in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and a belief and advocacy for the calling of the church in the Great Commission to go and make disciples. Three areas. We're called out, but for what purpose? We're called out to model, to live out, and to advance Jesus' way of life in this world. Do you get that? Jesus set the standard. He showed us how to live, And he said, Darren, it's not only for you to experience, but part of your experience is intended to be replicated into people who are not experiencing it. And so let me take just a few minutes as we close this morning to just kind of touch on these three areas, these key areas about what we're to be politically advocates for. The Great Commandment, Matthew chapter 22, verses 37, 38, and 39. Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. So this is the foundation of Jesus' political kingdom. When he talks about loving God and loving others. Now we have to be careful here because we may initially think this and cognitively say, I get that. I'm supposed to love God. I'm supposed to love other people. Okay, got that. Let's move on to something else. No. Right? Like, let's be aware of thinking that we have this handled because a trite awareness is not a living reality. This is an ongoing life experience to learn what it means to live in the love of God for yourself, to reflect it back to Him, and to be able to actively love other people. That ain't something you master, right? That is an active, ongoing practice that is being developed and worked on in us every day. But this is foundational to Jesus' political kingdom. Citizens of Jesus' kingdom, for us that are part of Jesus' kingdom, life begins as we receive God's love for us and we reflect it back to Him. It starts with God's love. It doesn't start from our action. It starts with God's love, an awareness and an accepting and a receptivity of God's love for us and learning to live in that love that is unconditional. It's not determined based on what you've done or what you haven't done. Now, as we learn to receive and to live within God's love for us, we then are able to reflect God's love back to Him. We can only love Him because He's loved us. That's actually scriptural. He has provided the love that we need in order to be able to love Him in return. We can't actively love God unless we're fully receiving His love for us. Otherwise, we can think that it's on our shoulders to make it happen. I can just try harder to love God. Nope, doesn't work that way. If you feel like you got to try harder to love God, you're probably not learning to live and to accept and receive God's love at the level that He wants you to receive it. Because your love then for Him will become more natural in your reflection to Him because it can't help but express itself back. Because you're so full of it and have been receiving it and living within it. So we love God by letting Him love us and by learning to develop an intimate, personal, daily, ongoing relationship with Him that's led by the Spirit of God. This is why we talk about developing and nurturing our time with God is so crucial and so foundational to the Christian experience. And so we need to develop. These are the things that we can do. We can put certain places and times in our day to create a space and an awareness to live in and to receive God's love and to meditate on His loving principles for us and to reflect and to communicate back to Him and to live in that place and that experience of health and life. And as a result of the health of this relationship with God, we gain the strength and the ability through God's work in us to do everything that we do in love. Again, you can't do it on your own. It's only out of that place of receptivity of God, His love for me, my reflection back to Him, that I actually can love people and I can do things in a loving way, in the way that I operate in this world. And so extravagant and unconditional love towards others should fuel all behavior and actions of the people of Jesus. Okay? That's what it means to be politically active in Jesus' kingdom. We're politically active in the ways of love. We're about developing that relationship with God, where I'm being loved and I'm expressing love back, and where I'm carrying out that love to people around me. Now, you may hear that and say, well, okay, that sounds good, but it's kind of like, I don't know really what that means, right? That's just kind of vague language. Love God, love other people. Okay, I get it. I don't understand where the practical application is. Let's move on to something else. Well, Jesus does actually a pretty darn good job of explaining the practical applications of loving God and loving other people. And He preached a whole sermon on it in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 called the Sermon on the Mount, which is all about living out or explaining how love motivates our actions on a daily basis towards people. He's very practical. And so if you look at the Sermon on the Mount, what you find is this comprehensive teaching that then shows us what the kingdom of God looks like, that's fueled by our love for God and for our neighbor. It's like the practical examples of what it means to live out the great commandment. It's a beautiful section of Scripture. I mean, I won't go into all the details here, but you can read Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and all the, it talks about being salt and light in this world. He talks about not murdering. Talks about, not looking with lust on the eyes of somebody else. Talks about keeping your oaths. Talks about not living according to the eye for eye principle. Learning how to love your enemies. Like Jesus basically said, as you learn to love the way that I've created you to love, it will change your interactions on a daily basis with the things in your life, what you do. You will look to respond with the God love in your actions, in your behaviors, as opposed to the selfish love or the selfish trying to get yourself affirmed or doing things out of a me attitude. And so living as Jesus people, it's another way to talk about the church. Living as Jesus people in this world leads us to loving actions that manifest themselves in every sector and area of life, with this hope of restoring people and situations back to God's life-giving purposes. Okay? So we're seeing the politics of this kingdom. It's the politics of love, receptivity of His love, reflecting it back, very tangible, expressive ways of how it impacts our day in and day out lives. And then there's this third part of the political manifest, you could say, for the church, and that is the Great Commission. It's given in Matthew chapter 28, verses 18, 19, and 20. Jesus came before He left. He brought all of His followers together. Actually, He brought his disciples with Him up on the mountain, and He said, listen, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I am with you always. I would add, and then they're doing it, in doing it with you and in you and through you, to the very end of the age. I think that's why Jesus brought that line in there, to caution them from thinking that this was all they're doing, right? Jesus gives them some commands on what the church is supposed to do and what they're supposed to be when He leaves. And so we not only learn to live in and receive God's love, we not only look to care or look to love others in very practical and restorative ways, but we live intentionally and we live going type lives, not just passively working towards change, letting change happen to us. But there's a certain active response that a citizen of the kingdom of God has in this world. He says that we're first of all supposed to go. This communicates sending and proactivity to leave what we know and do something different. We did a message on this a couple of weeks ago. It communicates that we don't wait for people to come to us, but we have a responsibility to go and incarnate Jesus where they are. That's very key, because we, as churches in America, have become very much come to us focused. We create an environment that asks the community to come to us, as opposed to mobilizing as a sending principle for the church to go and to bring and to be the kingdom towards others where they are. That's a very missional principle, but it's at the heartbeat of what Jesus' meaning of the word go is. It's the mission of God. It's where the word incarnational ministry comes from, that Young Life is a big proponent of. They don't wait for high school students to come to them. They go to and they penetrate the local community schools, right? Building relationships and bridges with students. They go, they heed this command to go as a very key component of their walk with Jesus. So He tells the church to go, and then He also says that we're to go doing what? Well, we're to go to make disciples, and then He gives them some clarifying points on how to do this. We're to expose people to the life and the freedom of Jesus, which may result in people deciding to move from darkness to light. We can't control that. We can't control that. Anybody that tries to tell you that it's a controlling factor, that it's the method of your presentation or how effectively you confront somebody, doesn't know what they're talking about. We are called to go. We are called to trust in God. We are called to look and see where the Spirit of God is at work, and we are called to actively join Him in that process. And we're called not only, and then when somebody moves from darkness to light, we're called to teach these new disciples what it means to be a disciple, to follow and to live by Jesus' teachings that we've just talked about. So the very things that we are practicing as disciples, Jesus intends for us to be agents of replication of that in people that are coming from darkness to light, right? That we all have a role in that. It's not just the pastor that's supposed to do that, right? It's that each disciple is equipped with their own tools because you've learned to practice it. You're living in it. You're learning it. You're the greatest teacher for other people for how this thing looks. As flawed as it all is for all of us, right? And so we've been commissioned by Jesus as the church to go and make as we go in God's strength and in His love, okay? So I'm going to wrap up right here. Concluding summary statement. My second summary statement. What is the church? Okay, stay with me here and I'm done. The church is a called out group of people organized around the politics of Jesus and His kingdom. These people put into practice certain actions, behaviors, and ways of life. These actions, behaviors, and ways of life can be most notably summed up as this. You want the secret? Here's the secret. This is the DNA of the church. People that are developing an intimate, personal, daily, ongoing relationship with Jesus that is led by the Spirit of God, which will fuel all of your actions and efforts. That's number one. If we don't have that, we don't have the foundation in place to be the church effectively. 2, out of that intimate personal relationship with Jesus, that we are able then to practice unconditional and sacrificial love towards the people of this world, which points people back to God's restorative and life-giving desires for them and other people. We love so that people can see life. We love so that people can be transformed by the kingdom, which has transformed us. 3, being the church means that we go to people and we expose them to the kingdom life of Jesus. It's not a waiting. There certainly is some waiting and passivity. That's normal, right? But the commissioning of the church is not a passive commission. It's an active commission. It's a commission to go and to be, not a wait and see. And then 4th, the church then is responsible for teaching and modeling those who enter kingdom life how to repeat the cycle. To simplify it further, the church is to love God, to love others, and to go and reach others who will do the same. That's the cycle. Now, when this cycle of life is being lived out and experienced within community, the church is present. It's really as simple as this. The church is being the church when we're living in this place. And so given this definition, a question for us to consider, and that I ask myself quite a bit, is are we being the church? And as with most churches in the Western context of the United States, in some measure we're accomplishing the first 2 points. You know, although we can get better, we need the Spirit of God to help us more in what it means to really love Him, receive His love, reflect it back to Him, and love other people. But we also need to understand this going nature of the church, because we've kind of wrapped ourselves up in a very come-as-you-see kind of nature. And what would it look like? What does it look like for the church to be actively going and being, right? With a force, not in a not a forceful force, right? But you know, a force of love. And so I think that is a crucial component for our future as we think about our church moving forward. How do we put into place going? What does that look like for us? While we develop the other things prior to that, like the love component, has got to be continually being worked on and developed. In order to have accurately, to be able to go in a healthy way, we have to have the love stuff functioning in a good way. But we shouldn't just wait for all the love stuff to get worked out before we go. It all kind of works together. And so next week, we're going to look at some early church examples of what this looks like in action and see if we can take some cues from them. How did they do it? They weren't perfect, but they seemed to get this. And if we want to succeed as a church moving forward, there's something here for us. A foundation that's already been established, that has started, of which many ways Mission Springs is very unique as a church in embodying many of these things. It's a very positive thing for our church. But are there ways for us to improve? I think so. Any church in their right mind would say yes, right? And so we'll look more at some examples next week of how the church operated and see what can we learn from this. Are there things here that God wants to show us, or ways in which we can implement, not necessarily exactly the same things that they did, but will help spur us on to these kinds of thoughts and considerations as we think about moving forward as a church in this world. Okay? Fair enough? Okay. Jesus, thank you for this morning. Thank you for the Scriptures. Thank you for what the Scriptures teach us about you, about your church. Would you kind of strike from our memory anything that I've said that's gotten in the way of the message that you want to have us all hear and participate in this morning? Pray that you would help us to be the people that you've called us to be, to not settle for kind of what we might see as comfortable church or easy church, but would you help us to really function according to our identity, function according to how you've created us to live. Because we know that it's only in that place that we fully experience your life. So we ask that you'd help us in Jesus' name. Amen. All right.